At dawn in Paris, a boulangerie pulls fresh baguettes from a stone oven. In Manhattan, a deli stacks bagels behind a glass case for the morning rush. In London, a corner cafe slides hot toast across the counter, tea on the side, the morning paper open. 3 cities, 3 breakfasts, all 3 priced to within a few cents by a single number on a single screen on a single street in Chicago, Illinois. That number was set 175 years ago, and it has not stopped running since. Here's exactly why. Every baker, every miller, every state grain importer on earth pays attention to a number set in Chicago. The number is called the CBOT, Chicago Soft Red Winter Wheat Futures Contract, ticker symbol ZW. It is the most liquid wheat contract in the world. About 187,000 contracts trade on an average day, each one representing 5,000 bushels, roughly the load of a single tractor trailer. When a grain trader in Rotterdam quotes the price of a shipment leaving Odessa, when a miller in Cairo bids on a tender from the Egyptian government, when a baker in Tunisia checks the price of flour for the week, they are quoting Chicago. They might call it something else, CIF Black Sea, FOB Rouen, Motif Paris. But underneath the labels, it's the Chicago price, plus or minus a small differential for shipping, quality, and timing. The technical phrase is basis trading. The plain English version is simpler. Every loaf of bread that crosses a border has Chicago's fingerprints on it, and every loaf that doesn't lives in the shadow of the loaves that do. The question is, why Chicago? A city of 3 million people in the middle of a continent, none of whose residents grow wheat. Why this place of all places and not Buffalo or St. Louis or Minneapolis or Paris? The answer starts in the spring of 1848. Chicago did not gradually win the global wheat trade. It stacked 3 irreversible advantages in 12 months. Force 1, April 1848. The Illinois and Michigan Canal opens. 96 miles of hand-dug canal connecting Lake Michigan to the Illinois River and from there to the Mississippi. For the first time, a barge could carry wheat from Iowa or Wisconsin into Chicago, then northeast across the Great Lakes to Buffalo, then through the Erie Canal to New York City, and never touch the long, slow, mosquito-ridden route down the Mississippi to New Orleans. Force 2, 1848. The Galena and Chicago Union Railroad begins operating. It is Chicago's first railroad. Within 15 years, it will be one of dozens. The Midwest is a vast, flat plain producing more wheat than any region on Earth, and railroads are the only technology that can pull that harvest off the land. Every single one of them will eventually terminate in Chicago. Force 3, April 3rd, 1848. 82 merchants meet above a flour store on South Water Street and found the Chicago Board of Trade. They needed a centralized place to write forward contracts on grain, to lock in a price today for wheat that wouldn't be delivered for months. The CBOT is born as a clearinghouse for promises about wheat. 3 things in 1 year: a canal that handed Chicago an exit, a railroad that handed Chicago an entrance, and an exchange that handed Chicago the paperwork. Chicago wasn't the only city that could have done this, but Chicago did it first. And once you're first, the geography of a continent's harvest starts rearranging itself around you. Here is the moment a physical commodity became a financial one. The historian William Cronin, in his book Nature's Metropolis, calls this the most important commercial innovation of the 19th century American Midwest. In 1856, the Chicago Board of Trade did something that sounds boring and turned out to change everything. It started grading wheat. Before 1856, wheat was physical. It was John Smith's Iowa wheat in burlap sacks on a particular barge with a particular smell. To sell it, you had to look at it. You had to inspect it. You had to know whose farm it came from, what the rainfall was that summer, whether the granary was clean. After 1856, wheat became number 1, number 2, or number 3. A trained inspector, paid by the Board of Trade, would take a sample, examine it, and stamp it with a grade. Once stamped, that grade was the wheat's identity. Any number 2 wheat was perfectly interchangeable with any other number 2 wheat. It didn't matter whose farm it came from anymore. The grade was the wheat. This is what economists call fungibility, and it sounds dry, but it is the entire foundation of modern commodity trading. Because once wheat could be a number on a piece of paper, you could sell that piece of paper. You could buy a claim on number 2 wheat without ever seeing the wheat. And in 1864, 8 years after the grading system started, the CBOT listed the world's first standardized exchange-traded futures contract. The grain was still in the elevator, but the price of the grain, the contract, had left Chicago. It was now a piece of information, and information moves at the speed of telegraph wire. The wheat did not need to travel for the trade to happen. Only the price did, and the price came from Chicago. The grain elevator wasn't even a Chicago invention. Joseph Dart and Robert Dunbar built the world's first steam-powered grain elevator in Buffalo, New York in 1842, 6 years before Chicago had a railroad or an exchange. Buffalo was the bigger grain port. Buffalo had the head start, but Buffalo was a transshipment point. Wheat came from the Midwest, sat in Buffalo briefly, and left for New York. Buffalo never built an exchange. It never wrote forward contracts. It never standardized the grade. The wheat passed through, and the information passed through with it, onward to wherever the next clearinghouse would emerge. That clearinghouse turned out to be Chicago. St. Louis had the Mississippi River and an older grain trade, but the river was slow, the steamboats were inconsistent, and railroads pulled most of the freight north toward the Great Lakes. By 1860, Chicago had passed St. Louis as the largest grain market in the United States. Kansas City founded its own Board of Trade in 1856, focused on hard red winter wheat. It survived for 156 years. Then, in 2012, the CME Group bought it for $126 million and folded it into Chicago. The Minneapolis Grain Exchange still trades hard red spring wheat independently, but at a fraction of Chicago's volume. This is what economists call a network effect. Once enough buyers and sellers concentrate at one exchange, every additional trader has to go to that exchange because that's where the liquidity is. The math compounds. Buffalo, St. Louis, Kansas City, Minneapolis, they didn't lose because they were wrong about wheat. They lost because Chicago got there first. That's path dependency, and it doesn't reverse. Here is the strangest part of this story. Chicago does not actually care about wheat. The CME Group has a market capitalization of approximately $105 billion. It generated $6.13 billion of revenue in 2024. Agricultural products account for roughly 7.7% of CME's total trading volume. Wheat specifically is a small slice of that small slice. The real money in Chicago is in interest rate futures, treasury bonds, and equity index futures, the E-mini S&P 500 contract, the most traded equity futures contract in the world. Wheat? Wheat is a vestigial organ, a reminder of what the city used to be, kept alive because the world hasn't built a replacement. But that's the whole point. The CBOT could shut its agricultural division tomorrow, and the global bread market would convulse, because there is no other deep, liquid, transparent venue to discover the price of internationally traded wheat. Path dependency does not require attention. It just requires that nothing else has been built. And in 175 years, nothing else has. Once a city becomes the answer, the rest of the industry rearranges itself around the answer. The 4 firms that dominate the global grain trade, the ABCD, Archer Daniels Midland, Chicago since 2014, Bunge, St. Louis, Cargill, Wayzata, Minnesota, $160 billion fiscal year 2024, Louis Dreyfus, Rotterdam/Singapore, with North American operations in St. Louis. 3 of those 4 are clustered within roughly 500 miles of the CBOT trading floor. ADM specifically picked up its corporate headquarters and moved it to Chicago in 2014 after 45 years in Decatur to be closer to global capital flows. That is what gravity looks like, slowly tightening over 175 years. The wheat doesn't grow in Chicago. The flour mills aren't in Chicago. The bakeries aren't in Chicago. None of the physical action of the global wheat economy happens in Chicago. What happens in Chicago is the price discovery. The wheat moves on barges. The price moves through Chicago. And then, sometimes, the world reminds you what the number is for. On February 24th, 2022, Russia invades Ukraine. Together, those two countries account for approximately 27 to 30% of global wheat exports. The Black Sea ports begin shutting down within hours. In Chicago, the CBOT wheat futures price begins moving immediately. By March 1st, it has hit limit up multiple sessions in a row. On March 8th, 2022, 12 days after the invasion, Chicago wheat futures hit an all-time high of just over $13.63 a bushel. The previous high had stood for 14 years. The bombs were landing in Mariupol. The price moved in Chicago. The bread prices moved everywhere else. In Egypt, in Lebanon, in Tunisia, in Yemen, in Sudan, in Lagos. The same pattern. A war 5,500 miles from Chicago showed up in your loaf because the price discovery happens in a building on West Jackson Boulevard. That is the price of geography.